Hello, greetings. Welcome to United States of Africa. This is Daniel Mombonu. Today is a special day for the Australian Aborigines. They are remembering 250 years after the arrival of the British sailor James Cook in April 29th, 1770. The moment he arrived, he started the colonization of Australia, and 250 years later, Australian Aborigines are denied full rights, and they are restricted in terms of land use. Most of their land is taken away. They have been fighting for freedom for the last 250 years. But because this is British colonialism, there is no one who keeps on talking about it. But the truth is, Australian Aborigines want independence, and they have been fighting for independence for more than 250 years. They never ceded their independence to the British colonizers. To this day, they have never ceded independence. So Australia remains sovereign to the Aborigines. But we need the African solidarity to ensure that the Australian Aborigines are respected. Today, one of the Australian Aborigines leader called me, and we discussed so many issues. He told me how the Australian government continues to oppress land rights for the Australian Aborigines and treat them as if they are second-class citizens. These are things that are happening, and you don't see that in the news, but the ongoing colonization of the Australian Aborigines must be strongly condemned. We must stand in solidarity with our brothers in Australia so that they regain their land. They cannot be governed under common law, yet they are sovereign people. They have their customs, they have independent culture, they have independent heritage. They are the real owners of the land. So therefore, the Australian Aborigines have a right to be free from any form of colonialism. They have the right to have full control of their land and to govern themselves according to the cultural laws of their tribes, because these are First Nation, the indigenous people, the same way West Papuans are. They are also indigenous people, and they are First Nation, which means they have a right to govern themselves. United States of Africa strongly condemns the imprisonment of Jakarta 6 political prisoners. Indonesia has imprisoned them for 8 to 9 months, charging them for treason just because they expressed their desire to be free. And these activists, all they did was to protest against racism, to protest against racial discrimination. Indonesia security forces have been calling West Papuans monkeys just because they are black, and this is something that has been some time. Systematic racism against indigenous people in West Papua, and this explains the brutal treatment of indigenous people in West Papua, because Indonesia maybe thinks these are not humans. Probably they are monkeys. So we have to come together as Africans and stand in solidarity with our brothers in West Papua, we demand independence for the people of West Papua, and we demand immediate release of all the political prisoners that Indonesia is holding. There are so many West Papuan political prisoners that have been imprisoned under false charges of treason, and the only reason that they've been imprisoned is for expressing their political opinions, for expressing their human rights, their desire to be free, for expressing their views regarding regarding the ongoing atrocities and the systematic human rights abuses in West Papua. This is the reason why they are being. This is the reason why they are being discriminated, and the same reason that Australian Aborigines are also being discriminated because they are black, because they are of African origin. This kind of systematic racism must come to an end. Australia has partnered with Indonesia to continue the genocide against West Papuans. Australia gives billions of dollars to Indonesia in terms of military aid, military equipment to facilitate the genocide. And no one is talking about this because it's not a black nation doing that, it's a white nation. We need to speak our voices without fear against this kind of collaboration between Australia and Indonesia in subverting human rights and oppressing indigenous people so that they can take their natural resources. This is what Australia has been doing in collaboration with Indonesia. They keep on destroying the environment of indigenous people so that they can take their natural resources. Over 500,000 indigenous people have died, but you can't. But still, you don't see the United Nations or the so-called International Criminal Court speaking about the systematic human rights abuses that is going on in West Papua. The so-called international human rights activists never speak about the genocide that is happening in West Papua. This is the time for complete liberation as the pandemic. This is the time to unite all people of African descent and break the shackles of slavery. Let us break these shackles of colonialism because there is no indigenous nation or any other nation that deserves to be colonized. The Australian Aborigines deserve the right to full independence. They have the right to determine their destiny without being governed by common law. Today, as I talked to the Australian Aborigine leader, he expressed his disappointment why they are being subjected to common law, yet they have their tribal customs, they have their tribal laws. This kind of subjugation of Aborigines by Australian government must come to an end. They must grant them autonomy, the right to be free, and they also need they need to ensure that Australian Aborigines have full control over their land because land is the factor of production, and ensure that they get equal access to opportunities by empowering the Australian Aborigines to be completely independent. That is securing their future and also preventing any future genocide because these British, the moment they invaded Australia, they caused bloodshed. a genocide, the Tasmanian genocide, killed the indigenous people, and even used biological weapons so that they can reduce their population. And this is why today you find out that the population of Aborigines is very small. It's because of systematic biological weaponry that has been deployed, and through the healthcare system since the colonial time to this day. So this is why there is need for people of African descent to come together, establish their own healthcare centers, so that we have everything under control. We should not let our healthcare be controlled by those who colonized us, by those who oppressed us, because they can never wish well for us. And even if they give us gifts, these gifts are just traps. They're just traps for us. This is why foreign aid has never been useful to Africa. The more foreign aid we get, the more we need, and it has never been enough. And this foreign aid is making Africa to behave like a small child, such a giant continent, leaning to beg every time. We are even witnessing African leaders begging for ventilators on social media, and this is very shameful because Africa, with all its natural resources, has immense economic power. If only we can control our natural resources and use them for the benefit of our people, ensure that these natural resources benefit Africans, and we put the interests of the African people first before any other foreign investors. All other foreign nations, they natural resources. There is no any African country in China that is mining in US, because these countries know the value of the natural resources, and they ensure that resources for their own development. But the sad reality is that Africa appears to be open for everyone. It has opened its arms for exploitation. They come in planes and rip us. They take away our natural resources to continue building their already developed economies. And the same countries are the ones which are asking why Africa is poor. They're the same countries that are sending aid to Africa and branding African nations as the world's poorest. Yet Africa is endowed with so much wealth. This is the time for us to change this and to restore the lost dignity of Africans. We must, as a people, demonstrate to the world that we can provide solutions to our problems, because the moment we come together and begin solving our own problems, then that will be a very good statement to the world. And even those who used to send us aid will start shivering in fear. They'll be ashamed of themselves. We need to develop Africa to the point that when pandemic strikes the world, then we can stand as donors. We can also send foreign aid to other countries, but not keep Africa so low in a position where we are always begging for things that we can create. This kind of madness needs to come to an end, and we need to build a prosperous, united Africa, an African nation that will not be divided among tribal lines, an African nation that will not be divided by social status or religion. we need to build a united African nation that will accommodate everyone, that will celebrate the diversity of African people, the diversity of our culture and national heritage. Thank you very much for joining from Gambia, the smiling coast of Africa. In order for us to combat the neo-colonialism, we must come together and forge a new way forward towards complete independence of Africa, champion towards self-reliance, because without self-reliance there is no future for Africa. And by learning how to be self-reliant, we begin to build and we begin to grow. But if you keep on relying for your distant neighbors to bring you food, to bring you water, to bring you everything that you need, you will become a slave, and you'll never be free. For he who feeds you controls you. He decides what you eat, when you eat, and what quantity, and even the quality of food that you eat. If a country relies on donations, then it's open to accept everything that it's given as aid without even checking on the quality. And this is what has been happening in Africa. There's a lot of foreign aid coming, and you'll see even the same donors donating more than 5 times, and African leaders are just cheering instead of waking up and realizing that there's no aid that will ever be enough for Africa. We need to become self-reliant, because the more aid you receive, the more humiliating it becomes for Africa. And people, the whole world now laughs at Africa, sees Africa as a very rich continent, but can't stand on its own. We are receiving donations even from TikTok. That's very hilarious, because if we are depending on social media companies to bail us out, then Africa is really in trouble. And this is in spite of the fact that we have countless natural resources. So why should we rely on Bill Gates, someone who complained about the population of Africa being so high that he wanted to do something to decrease the population of Africa? Then in 2020 is coming out as a savior with his aid and his vaccine, which he purports to be the answer to end the pandemic. But we Africans, it's part of his depopulation campaign, and wants to use the vaccine as a tool for depopulation of Africans, because he failed to get the target that he wanted. He wanted to see 10 million bodies of Africans lying in the streets, but this did not happen. Africans are innovating. We have seen Africans creating ventilators, masks, very high quality masks, and Africans are waking up. We have seen Madagascar create a herbal remedy for coronavirus, and this is something that should inspire every African. We have also seen new technologies that have emerged, and these are initiatives that have been engineered by Africans, very young people. There was one teen in Nigeria who invented a ventilator, and many others who are coming up with solutions to this pandemic. So even in Senegal, they developed a kit that can test coronavirus in just 10 minutes, and it's worth only $1. It's actually the cheapest in the world. So we Africans have so much talent. We have a lot of talented young people, and the only thing that we need to do is just come together, overcome our tribal differences, overcome our differences in these colonial boundaries, and come up with a unified Africa, unified positions when you're speaking about issues that relate to Africa. And by doing this, then we will realize the United States of Africa vision. As just like Dr. Kwame Nkrumah said, Africans are crying for unity. We are suffering because of this unity, and the moment we unite, then we will solve most of the problems that we are facing, and we'll be able to gather ideas. Say these Africans from South Sudan can innovate something, and there are also some from Uganda, they can do that. Some from Kenya can innovate something, and then we bring all these ideas together. We establish one indivisible and united African country, and now this will be the only hope for Africans. Unity of Africa can start with the economical aspect, solving the economic challenges that Africa is facing, even as we fight the pandemic. So if we begin with the economic plan for Africa, a single plan for Africa, then we build an economy for United States of Africa, and this is something that political approval for this to happen. We only need to come together, crowdfund the resources that are required, and set up a massive industrial complex for Africa as a nation. And this now will be a source of employment, a source of income for Africans. And having a strong economic footprint in Africa, we can regain the control of our resources and use them for our own development. Then ensure that we set all the institutions have one currency. You cannot have one currency when you haven't built the African Central Bank. So the first thing is building the African Central Bank, and then start operations there. Thereafter, no one will be asking, no one will be will be saying that this is just a story. If we are talking about the African Central Bank, there's already a building there, and if we are talking about one single currency, this is something that can be implemented, because they'll be seeing there's an African Central Bank that has been built there, and it's operating, it's trading all African currencies. And then with the decision now to come up with the one single currency for Africa, that can be easily enforced. And the fact that we have the intra-Africa trade deal that has been signed, it was just to be rolled down, but due to the coronavirus pandemic, it has been postponed. But we have a deal for trading throughout Africa without any restrictions. The next thing that we need is the single African currency, which will make trade much more easier. And if we make the trade easier, then it means that we have started uniting economically, because by uniting economically, then the next step will be political union, which is coming up with a government, unified African government, that ensures that we have one foreign policy in terms of international relations. We have a unified defense system, a unified African military, and have a unified education system, unified healthcare system for Africa, and by doing that also have one single Africa development plan, and make sure that every African country is developed at the same pace. Then if we achieve all this, would have attained the United States of Africa vision step by step, but everything would have been achieved. There are so many skeptics that have been talking about a United States of Africa, saying that this cannot be achieved. But they're saying that this is just something that is near impossible. But today I tell them there's nothing that is impossible unless you have limited yourself, and you have decided that your dreams are not big enough. If you have a dream and these dreams are just too small, they don't even scare you, you better go back to sleep and dream again, so that these dreams can be big enough to scare you. United States of Africa is a vision so big, is a dream so big that it scares me every day. What will happen if we attain United States of Africa? What are we going to do to achieve this? It appears a dream impossible, but with strong-willed people and courageous people, we will attain United States of Africa. We need as many more leaders like me throughout Africa. This is why the Global Pan-Africanism Network has established a network of young people and Africans throughout Africa and beyond, ensuring that we are connected both in Africa and in the diaspora. Is very important because unity of Africa has to be backed by the African diaspora, and the African diaspora being in a different position, they can easily financially support the United States of Africa vision, so that we can roll out the Africa Development Program, ensure that we start promoting agriculture, large-scale agricultural revolution, by delivering food in the tables of Africans. Would have begun to develop Africa, because once people have food security, they can start thinking about setting a business. They can start thinking about coming together, establishing industries, because these people are not hungry anymore. They have enough food, and they even that they can sell in a new industry that will be. This is what we need for Africa to strengthen our agricultural system. DR Congo alone is capable of feeding half of the entire world. So just imagine if we develop every African country, will be able to produce enough food for more than 500 years in just 1 year. So this is why unity of Africa is very important, and we also need the African diaspora to join the struggle of African unity, by the African diaspora and also the Africans in Africa working together. We are going to realize United States of Africa project, and this vision will no longer be a mirage. We'll start living it, and the more we live it, this vision will become a reality to so many people. Thank you very much for following us on YouTube. Now we have more than 1,000 followers, and this is something that is very significant. Africa is a continent that cannot stand alone, as it has demonstrated, relies on aid. Yet Africa is so large. This is something that we need to end. Africa cannot be depending on other continents, yet it has immense natural resources. We have to crack our heads. Let us think and see what is going on, what is wrong, and come up with ways to make amends. And what Africa needs is just leadership. And this leadership, if political leadership has failed, then we can provide economic leadership. There's so many African experts who have studied economics, and if we bring them together, we can set up an economic development plan without any political interference, because we'll just be playing economics alone, and come up with ways in which we can economically empower Africans and encourage Africans to work together to empower themselves, because you cannot empower everyone unless these people come together. They rise up and say, we are going to empower ourselves. We Africans, though we are 1.3 billion people, if we are working alone, then we are just like a drop in the ocean. And it doesn't matter how many drops you throw into the sand, these drops will not make a difference. But if these drops come together, they'll become a huge ocean, and people will start seeing the impact. So this is why the unity of Africa is very important. We must come together, and by coming together, we will realize the Africa that we want, begin to develop ourselves so that Africa can stand on its own. We cannot forever be depending on our former colonizers or former colonial masters for aid, for gifts. Yet Africa has countless natural resources. We have a young, vibrant population that is ready to develop Africa. So we only need to come together and start come up with the African development plan, and develop ourselves, ensure that we are self-reliant. You can support United States of Africa project on Patreon, or on the pinned video. You can see there's a PayPal link. You can donate to support this project, and you can also be part of Global Pan-Africanism Network, so that you can be actively involved. As a member, and be an ambassador for the United States of Africa.